No, but they don't get paid personally.
Right, the money goes to the
To the pool.
organization, right, and they've got,
I get what she's
it's
trying to
between,
do.
it's Air Force and Army ROTC. The Navy backed out, and they were working on sort of shaming.
Corey?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Monday, November 5th Transportation Commission meeting. First agenda is to approve the regular minutes from October 1st and study session minutes for October 17th, 2018. First, the study session, first the regular meeting minutes for October 1st, 2018. Do you have a motion to approve minutes from October 1st?
Second.
A motion from Holtzman and second from Ziegelmeyer. Okay. Motion passes. Okay. Study session minutes for October 17th, 2018.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain?
I abstain.
Lots of abstentions, I think.
Are we on the study session?
Study session.
They didn't even form it. They didn't?
Who else? Dylan? Okay.
All right. Okay. So if there's any general public comments, we'd like to hear that now. And general public comment is on anything not on the agenda. If you would like to public comment on any general items, you have 3 minutes. Individuals would come to the microphone and state their name and address all comments to the commission. It's not our policy to debate these or make any decisions on them at this time, so.
My name is Nicole Allensworth, and I am a resident here of Lawrence, Kansas. First, I would like to apologize for not being present on October 1st due to my TBI. I somehow get my dates mixed up. For the traffic commissioners and attending public, I would like to introduce some of the facts that EgnerSnyder.com. The first one is from the Nation Safety Council. They report that all phone use while driving leads to 0.16 million crashes each year. The second one states that the 390,000 injuries occur each year from accidents caused by texting and driving as well. They also comment that the texting and driving is 6 times more likely than driving drunk as far as regarding accidents. And then they also state that when a teen is with only one additional passenger, doubles the risk into a fatal car accident. And then if they have 2 or more people, they're 5 times more likely. And they also comment that 94% of drivers would support a ban on texting and driving. Another fact from the United States Department of Transportation states that answering a text takes away 5 minutes or 5 seconds of your attention. With that being said, it takes about 55 miles per hour. That's like driving the length of a football field, just across. So 5 seconds equals 55. Would be 55 miles per hour. It's just going across the field of a car accident with their eyes closed. Considering all the facts, I propose that we follow Manhattan's law of handheld for driving, and phones must be mounted on their dashboards, which only costs around $25. With that, they can also use a Bluetooth and the map called Drive Mode. In Manhattan, a woman had her phone in her lap when police approached her car after pulling her over and got a fine because it was not mounted. Regarding the police, I've talked to different police officers with this petition, but they say that since they can't enforce it until it's a law. Again, it's time to change our law because the epidemic is only getting worse as we speak. And my question to you is, what are the issues that are keeping us from going forward?
Does anybody have any comments or questions on this today?
Well, I have just one, and it's more of an administrative question in terms of, over the months that we've been doing this, certainly things that are on our agenda that are, that we've discussed, it seems like there ought to be a mechanism for tracking those things. And I would think that, I'm not sure I'm asking the question, what's the best way to do that? And we do understand that some things are not prioritized and accept that. But I'd just kind of like to have if there's a way to have a small list of items like this that we just pop in front of our eyes from time to time.
Well, on this particular item with the hands-free device, we did did some research with the police department as we discussed at the last meeting, and presented that information to the city manager through a city manager report. So as far as future items for us to study or look at, I don't think it's something that's going to be on our list of things to review or to do. I mean, we have kind of a work plan that we've kind of developed of things to get to for study sessions and topics to look at. So until the city commission were to direct us to look at it or give us some specific direction, it's not really an item that we're going to keep track of going forward unless directed by the commission.
There is on the bottom of our agenda, on our calendar, there is items that are upcoming for both study sessions and this had been tracking on that until, I probably need to update it actually, in the last couple months.
So it won't be on there now.
No, because now it's basically in
Okay.
city commission's hands at this point.
Okay. Well, if that's the way it works, okay. There's certain issues that come up that I kind of feel like we ought to be responsible from time to time just to revisit them.
Yeah, but I think for us, city commission is the one who has the authority to direct staff. There's a staff. We've met with the police department.
Okay.
That's the position at this time. That doesn't mean it will be the position forever, but that's the position at this time, and so that's the position we're in now.
Okay. So a person like Nicole and a public person would, from time to time, want to come to this group or the city commission to see if there's any updates.
Yeah, I think it would best be to go to the city commission to present her information and see if there's some direction that would come from them.
Okay, that makes sense.
You can certainly come here, but again, we're not getting direction from this body on
Right.
things to look at.
Okay.
But
Okay.
And after, back a year and some ago, when I did speak, I went to the city commissioners the day after, and they told me that, I talked to one of the commissioners there, and he told me to take it right back to the traffic commissioners. So I'm getting told to go back and forth between you guys, and, which gets confusing, especially with somebody for TBI, and, a teenager to deal with, but, I'm really passionate about this, and a life is a life. I mean, I'm not saying that domestic violence shouldn't be one of the top priorities, or pulling somebody over for not stopping at a stoplight, because that can cause a car accident. But I've been there, I've been through it, and I don't want anybody else having to go through this. And if we can prevent it in some form, shape, or form, and I do plan on addressing the state at some point when I have enough signatures and I've hit different areas of all the different areas and cities and towns in Kansas. So, anyways, I just wanted to make that be known. Appreciate you letting me speak.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay. Our third agenda item is complete streets policy.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Mortinger, and I'm the Senior Transportation Planner with the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization. I just have a few quick slides to introduce the series of the next 3 issues that are on the agenda, while each item excuse me, will be talked about and discussed separately. I wanted to present a little bit of overlay to describe how all of these fit together in a more holistic picture of multimodal transportation programs. So while each item, the staff is requesting your recommending approval to the City Commission and your feedback on such, and they will be separate actions and discussions on each item, and that's why they're numbered so. There's 3 items before you tonight: the Complete Streets update to address the Transportation Commission goals that you identified at your previous study session and in some of your work, and to address feedback from the City Commission. The Neighborhood Traffic Management Program, which is the proposed replacement program for traffic calming, which is a comprehensive approach to address neighborhood traffic concerns. And then some traffic code changes to improve staff responsiveness to requests from citizens. All of these programs really support the goals and visions that we've laid out as a city in our strategic plan. Many of the critical success factors, primarily the idea of safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods, as well as just innovative infrastructure and asset management. So we're really looking forward, I think, in terms of how this overall approach plays out in making staff more responsive and our multimodal networks more efficient and useful for people. This also means we're implementing Transportation 2040. There's 3 primary goal areas about access and choices, mobility and prosperity, and preservation, safety, and security. That these are 3 strategies I pulled out that I identify that these proposed programs address out of strategies recommended out of Transportation 2040, which is the long-range plan for Lawrence and Douglas County. It also serves as Chapter 8 in Horizon 2020. And those 3 strategies are identified on the screen. To show you a little bit about how these all kind of play in together, not on this list is the traffic code changes because they're really about efficiency and staff process, but you can see here how on the far left, the Transportation Commission's non-motorized prioritization process works to implement Transportation 2040 and all of the mode-specific plans that have been identified. Then there's the updated Complete Streets policy, which we're looking at new or reconstructed streets instead of standalone bike ped projects, which is the other. And then the 3rd tier of that we really envision is Neighborhood Traffic Management Program, which would be a more holistic 5Es approach to improve neighborhoods, driver awareness management, and control of traffic. So that's kind of how we envision these all together to help you kind of grasp some of the conversations and how they might interrelate as we talk about multimodal transportation programs in Lawrence.
Good evening, Dave Cronin, City Engineer. I'm going to walk through an overview of our Complete Streets policy and the proposed revisions that we've made to it tonight. So the city first adopted a Complete Streets policy back in 2012, and that first policy has encouraged the use of complete streets elements in roadway design. Here last year, the National Complete Streets Coalition held a workshop here in Lawrence for staff and members of the public to come discuss complete streets, the concept of complete streets. That also included some time spent reviewing the existing Lawrence Complete Streets policy and identifying areas of improvement with that policy. So that's kind of why we are here today. Following that workshop, we had some discussions with the Transportation Commission and staff, and thought it was a good time to revisit this policy. It had been over 5 years, and we did notice a few areas where we could help improve the policy, particularly when it comes to transparency with documentation and providing design engineers clear guidelines of the policy. And so we formed a subcommittee. I'm going to let Steve kind of walk through this information on the subcommittee.
Sure. The members of our subcommittee were Catherine, Michelle, Amanda, Dave, and me. And we started meeting, I think, what did you say, July of 2017, and met monthly until about 6 weeks ago when this thing really started coming together. As Dave said, the Smart Growth of America looked at other cities that had programs or similar bike ped programs in place. Those cities included Onalaska in Wisconsin. Topeka's really got some pretty good stuff for bike and peds, and we had a look at some of their documentation also. And Orlando, Florida has a really good complete streets policy that we looked at. Smart Growth of America has outlined 10 elements, and I won't go through all 10 of them, but I just wanted to note a few just to give you a little flavor if you haven't looked at this stuff in detail. 4 of those elements were vision and intent, diverse users, land use context, and implementation steps. It's a pretty broad outline of things that they actually score policies around the country that are submitted, I believe, on an annual basis. We really wanted this policy. It would have been kind of easy to look at policies that were out there and cut and paste and put something together, but we really wanted to develop something that was clearly for Lawrence. And I guess we'll leave it up to the practice to see if we've accomplished that. I did review and back-checked our policy against those 10 elements. And I could really go in and say that all 10 of those elements I can check off. Now, I can't say that we would have scored, the highest score on each one of them, but I can say that I believe all 10 of those elements are addressed in our policy. We scored high on some of these and low on others. We used those grading systems to kind of guide our development of the language as time moved on. We haven't talked about this, but it might be good whenever Smart Growth gets around to, looking at those policies on an annual basis. I'd be curious to see where, the critique of our policy would come in against all the others around the country. Finally, Aaron and I spoke about this a little bit, but when you look at the policy, it can be kind of broad and subjective. And when we looked at the old policy, we kind of thought, gee, okay, it's got a lot of good stuff in it, but where do we go from here in actually implementing or following the policy to make things happen? And I think what brings this one together is the checklist. The checklist is very comprehensive. We had a fairly good start on it, and Dave and Amanda really took that to the finish line, and I think did a great job. But the policy itself, I think you could critique it to being broad and subjective, but with the checklist, I think you have the ability for us as transportation commissioners and the public to look at the various elements, very specific things that would go into a complete street.
All right, thanks, Steve. So our proposed complete streets policy has a vision, and that's pretty similar to the existing complete streets policy that we have here in Lawrence, in that we shall consider all aspects of multimodal transportation in the design and implementation of street and related infrastructure projects, with the principle of establishing a complete and connected street network with emphasis on active modes of transportation, including biking, walking, and wheeling. As far as the applicability of the complete streets policy, the policy does state that it should be used on all transportation and land use projects that use public funds. It does not apply to maintenance projects, but staff will consider complete streets elements in those projects if they're feasible. It doesn't apply to privately funded projects, and there's some other exemptions provided in the policy that are similar to what was in the existing policy. The goals of the Complete Streets policy address the needs of all users, consider the future demand in street projects so that we're thinking into the future as we continue to grow as a community, to consider our transportation network. Another point that we're trying to build on is to provide for all users during construction projects. So when we have road closures, sidewalk closures, to make sure we're thinking about those temporary detours for all users on projects. Also to consider underserved areas and connections to other improvements. Consider the community context, and to increase education to raise awareness of other transportation modes. So going into the implementation, as Steve mentioned, this is one of the items that we've think that's going to help enhance this new policy, is that we have a checklist that's should be used in the planning and design phase of a project. The goal of the policy is that we would have both internal and external review of complete streets elements in a project. So it would be reviewed internally by the multimodal staff team. And in addition, this is kind of the checklist that we would present to the Transportation Commission as we bring projects to you to talk about conceptual and preliminary design phases of the project. And again, this checklist is to enhance the transparency and documentation of the Complete Streets review process. Typically, when we present projects to this body or the City Commission, we discuss Complete Streets elements that have been included in the project. This checklist that we have developed will help document that process. The other area this policy is enhanced with is in the performance measures. So there's some language in here in the new policy that we'll be tracking performance measures annually. These measures will be collected by the MPO and Municipal Services Department. They are performance measures that are in the existing T2040 plan, and they're being tracked by the MPO. They are also specifically tracked for environmental justice zones by the MPO, some of these criteria. So this, the addition of adding the performance measures will help annually track the progress that we make to complete streets in Lawrence. And so that's all I had. We spent over a year studying other policies and reviewing Smart Growth America, and I appreciate the work of the subcommittee and staff that helped get us to this point. So tonight we're looking for a recommendation for this group to recommend approving the policy to go to the City Commission. So with that, we'll stand for any questions regarding Complete Streets.
Questions? I'd say if we have any questions, we can ask those questions and then public comment, bring it back for a discussion. No one? I might have a couple. I think I have everything pretty much answered. Okay, I just wanted some examples. So it says exceptions, section 6 exceptions. B, C, D, and E says if there are limited trip generators, both existing and in the future, indicate absence of need for such accommodations. C's detrimental environmental social impacts that outweigh the need for accommodations D is cost of accommodations is excessively disproportionate to the cost of the project. And E, the safety or timing of the project is compromised by the inclusion of complete streets. And I was actually just looking for some examples of like, for instance, I mean, maybe one for each, but specifically, like environmental and social impacts that outweigh the need for accommodations would be of particular interest.
Yeah, I don't know if I could point to any project that we've worked on in Lawrence where in the past that would have used that exemption on a project. But if you were, for say, building a road through an area that was in wetlands or some other, adjacent to some other environmental situation where you want to have some preservation, or you or you're going through a neighborhood and you have limited right-of-way, those are the type of projects that could be seen as exempt from the policy, where it would cause harm to the environment to have additional width for a bike facility or sidewalks or whatnot. So on that, I don't know if I could have any specific examples for environmental or social impacts. There are I guess one example I would say as far as the cost of accommodations. That was semi-recent. It's been since the policy was adopted in 2012 was when we reconstructed Iowa Street. And on the east side of Iowa between Bob Billings and going to the north and I think University Drive, we looked at the cost to put a sidewalk on the east side of Iowa. The topography is very tough there. I think it's 2-to-1 slopes on either side of the road. We were able to squeeze a sidewalk in on the west side and had a barrier. So that was kind of an example of something we looked at. Back then it would have been very expensive to grade an additional width of the road and remove a bunch of trees and build a retaining wall for what could have been minimal impact. So that's one example I could think of here in the last 5 years where we kind of pointed to, well, that makes sense to not put a sidewalk on the east side of the street, because we try to do sidewalks on both sides of the street, So that's kind of an example of something, a situation that could be seen as an exemption.
So also B, limit trip generators, both existing and in the future, indicate absence of need for such accommodations. You have a good example of that. I mean, it could even be from outside of Lawrence or.
Well, it would just, if we took a view of what the proposed project was and if for an example, if you didn't have a neighborhood on the south side of the street, or you never would you put a sidewalk on that side of the street if there's not a lot of benefit to it? So I think it would be subjective. I mean, some of the complete streets will still be context sensitive, and it's not completely black and white. So I think, depending on the situation, again, I don't know if I can think of a situation to point to in Lawrence where we've said that. But it's just, it's just one of the things I think it's kind of some of these exemptions are pretty similar in other complete streets policies. It does give the city some ability to make a judgment decision. And so, but I don't think it's going to be the norm to point to these on projects, but there could be the possibility in the future, so that's why it's in there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I just have a question about the process for the exceptions. This establishes criteria, but it wasn't clear to me who makes the decision? Are exceptions something that are documented in the checklist? Or is that like, how do they get identified and explained in
They would be identified in the checklist.
the checklist?
Yeah.
So like, where it has, does it provide appropriate pedestrian accommodations? There's, one of the options here is sidewalks. In the case where there's an exception to the sidewalks on both sides of the street, how would you answer this, included or not included? If it's included on like half, like, would that be included with an explanation, or how would you imagine doing that?
Yeah, I think it would be in the explanation. I mean, I think,
Wouldn't that be like in the constraints? Where, okay, constraint type thing, right, what, oh, yeah, then the next line of explanation. Is that where you do that?
yeah.
I guess I'm wondering if it's as black and white as yes, no, or if maybe there's some way to differentiate that it's not complete, like it's partially accommodated. And that might,
It's about as no,
all right, so in that,
personally. I mean, I think it's gonna be each engineer filling it out, right?
I'm thinking if someone were to take these checklists over time and do some analysis, how often would they say an exception was made? And then, you know, so how this checklist gets used in relation to the policy around the exceptions, I think. I'd be curious how that could be made it really clear to the public, like, yep, there's an exception made, here's the rationale. And that's okay, like, that's how our process works. And if that exception, there's a problem, like someone has a concern about that exception, and ultimately that's the city commission's prerogative, but we've made it really clear recommendation, like we concur or we don't with, you know, the justification for the exception. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does a little. I think, I mean, the explanation is to help document the reason why a complete streets element may not be in a project. That doesn't necessarily, I mean, we had this discussion on projects before. What's a complete street? Is it all or nothing?
Right.
We've all said, no, it's not all or nothing. I mean, it's context sensitive, and there's some subjectivity to it. And so as engineers, we like to have clear, defined criteria and be able to say yes or no. And that's what is challenging about this, because you could do a lot of these elements and then have an example where you're missing some element, and does that make it not a complete street? I think people have would have different opinions on that. So this is to help document the reason behind including or not including the elements. If it's a cost or other concern, that would be documented, it would be explained, and that staff would explain the project, the engineer would explain the project, and you'd have some context or reason behind that decision. And then ultimately, staff makes the recommendations on the projects and the exemptions, and that would be held at the staff level.
So the example you gave of Iowa, in that case, are you imagining that would be a check in the not included box with a description of the sidewalk not being practical, or that the cost of accommodating it made it not included on the east side of Iowa?
Yeah, I think you would, on our list, I don't think it says sidewalks on both sides. It does say sidewalks, included or not included. It's almost, on that situation, it's almost both. But we would definitely mark or an explanation in here that said, well, there's not a sidewalk on this section of the street, and this is the reason why. And so that's I think one of the challenges that we looked at with this checklist. We did walk through a couple of projects, and there was some, we were kind of thinking, the staff, when we reviewed it, how would we use this? And a lot of it was just, well, we would make sure it was detailed in the explanation to explain
Okay.
the situation.
Can I add just a little bit to that thing? We did do some test projects in developing the checklist. And the real benefit that I saw from it was facilitating the discussion. Just getting, so often we get design plans and, here they are. Well, what are we going to do with these things? With that checklist, you can really go through the criteria and those aspects of that design and ask a lot of questions. And I really think that's what we're up here for, is to ask questions and understand why decisions are being made. I'm going to really hang my hat on that checklist in all of this policy and related documents as, a really very valuable tool for everybody.
I think this will obviously change with use. Once you have this information, you start tracking it. Then you may add further questions. You find it a little easier to use this way, or I wish I had that piece of information. But that'll develop as you use it.
We've had public comment about curb radii. Is that considered as part of the checklist?
Gee, I don't know if it's on there or not, but it's,
I recall when there was discussion about Queens Road, I think it was the contractor who was describing the project several months ago to the city commission that said the radii were going to be built to help slow down traffic as it turns from 6th Street to Queens Road. And I know that issue's come up before here, so I'm just curious, would that be considered part of the pedestrian accommodations and in the,
Well, there's, under pedestrian and bicycle facilities, curb bump outs. So reduce pedestrian crossing distance at intersections where high motor vehicle counts and high pedestrian counts are expected.
I don't think it's about crossing distance, it's about the,
The design of the
vehicles
curb.
moving quickly through a right turn.
Well, it's also crossing distance, making them smaller improves the crossing distance too, because it pulls that curb out more.
Okay.
So one affects the other.
Yeah, but as far as, it's a little different in the bump outs, like we have downtown, do shorten the distance, and they have tight curb radii. But I think your question, and the project that I remember talking about was on 23rd Street. I think that question came up in public comment about what the curb radii is. That's not, I don't think that's anything that's not on here. That's more of a design element that the engineer needs to follow design guidelines on what's appropriate. So it's, I don't think there's anything in here that says, well, we're using a curb radii of 20 feet or 25 feet on the project. That's not, it's not something that we included in here. Unless I'm missing something, Amanda.
No, I think, when you're talking about the crossing distance, that should take that into account. You shouldn't be using a larger radius than needed.
I had just another question and then, well, maybe two questions. The performance measures, I appreciate that there are specific measures. I wanted to just clarify if the bikeway network was inclusive of Sharrows, or is it, are you imagining this report giving us
So we
a breakdown of all the
literally
different
break it down
types?
to the table, just like in T2040, which
Okay.
breaks down a percentage for every facility type.
Okay,
I can't recall if it specifically has Sharrows now, but we would do it exactly the same.
okay. That's
Note
what I
this
was-
also says, it includes all of these measures, but it's not limited to these, so we could report on other things.
Okay. And then under, what, section 4, letter D, there's two abbreviations that are used. Manual uniform traffic control devices. The other one I think is a typo. Probably should be the ADA accessibility guidelines. And just curious if we could see that spelled out instead of using the abbreviations for any of the public that may not be familiar with.
We've noted that already.
Any other questions? All right. Ready to hear public comments? Public comment on this item?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Michael Allman, Sustainability Action Network, Bicycle Pedestrian Advocacy. I think this is a very good step forward for the most part. Our organization and several others in town for a number of months now have been voicing interest in a complete street policy that would say that complete streets are the default design and option unless shown to be not possible. That is what is the standard and the norm. The 2012 policy was very loosey-goosey on that. It had a lot of outs, a lot of escape clauses. This policy is a bit better. We're grateful for that, particularly like the checklist that Commissioner Evans has pointed out. However, I went through the wording of the policy and I counted, I think it's 8 instances of the word should. Now, if you understand legal policy, the word should is pretty much optional. It's like, it would be nice if that were to be done, but it's optional. Whereas the word shall is required. So just to illustrate what I'm thinking, I mean, these words should, they should be shall instead, is what I'm saying. For instance, in Section 3, if we have a good policy and we want to make use of it, shouldn't it read, the city shall follow the complete streets policy? I mean, isn't that a given? Similar down the next paragraph down, if we're going to hang our hat on the checklist, as Commissioner Evans said, the complete streets policy includes a checklist that shall be used. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? So that's why I'm saying the wording in here is really the difference between whether this policy is going to accomplish what we hope it to, or just be there as something to pull out as needed. So I much prefer if it, were stated very clearly that yes, this is what we shall do. Other than that, I'm not sure. Well, the timer's not going. Did I run out of time?
Never started it.
Oh, I'll be quick. I just have a question on the checklist. I don't see center lane, whatever, pedestrian islands. Is that referenced in different wording here, or is it just not included? Because I don't want them anymore, so I'd rather that not be in there. I was just curious what the wording here means. You have pedestrian bridge, I don't think so. Mid-block crosswalks, could be anything. The reason I say that is because they're good for pedestrians, most assuredly, but most bicyclists do not like having the motor vehicles and the bicyclists all forced into one lane, and the bicycle lane that used to be there ended, and so it's not beneficial in a lot of bicyclists' mind to have that island that works well for pedestrians and not for bicyclists. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this? Okay, could bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Well,
Anybody ready?
with respect to Michael's comments, the should, shall, would, we've talked about that a lot too, and I think that this did go through a legal review, correct?
Correct.
And I think that may have generated some of the language that we see here. I guess at the end of the day, I think it's still a pretty strong policy with should in here myself. I don't think this group is just going to cast it away if there is a project that comes up. So I guess, most of the time I'm a little more, along the lines of shall, but I really think that the should is, in my opinion, fine. It's probably not going to change how it's practiced in this group. I don't believe, my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'll comment briefly on that. We had that discussion on shall versus should, and
Yeah.
I think when we discussed with our legal department, that was one of the concerns. It's more binding, and I think the intent of the policy is that we should do, and I think we're going to be held to that expectation regardless of the wording. I mean, I do understand the shall is a more definitive word in there, but staff's position is that the word should be the word in there for this policy.
Mhm.
I have one question about in section 3, applicability. The last sentence says, the checklist should, among other things, include clear-cut guidelines identifying who is responsible for maintenance and repairs. And then there is a section in the checklist on maintenance. Does assigning, like if you say pavement rehab, does that define who's doing it, who's responsible for it, or snow removal, or?
Yeah, I think that in the column above it, this is advanced notification for key groups. So like, for example, if it was a shared use path, so there was additional snow removal, we would make sure that Parks and Rec was included in the review process, so they
Gotcha.
knew it was coming. So those two things kind of work together.
Okay, thanks.
I don't think this is that important, but the should and shall. I'm just wondering, like, the complete streets policy includes a checklist that shall be used or should be used, it says should be used, when making decisions about components of the street, complete streets elements that will be included in a particular project. If we already have that checklist and the checklist is what's going to be used, would it really be that bad or hard to use shall?
Well, again, when we reviewed the language, I thought that's the word that we felt was appropriate for the applicability.
Okay.
There is a word shall in the next sentence. The multimodal staff team shall ensure there's interdepartmental involvement and coordination in the
Right.
decision-making process.
There's
But
a lot,
I-
kind of
I
shall
think-
and should, isn't there a lot?
Yeah, and the checklist, there may be some situations where it just doesn't make sense to have a checklist for a very
Okay.
basic project. And so then
Right.
if we're spending a lot of time doing checklists that it's not really
Okay.
needed, then I think the should is appropriate
Okay.
for that.
I'm gonna look at this and I think it's a lot better than what we had. And, I mean, as I've been at this longer, I see how important it is for things to be flexible. But I think what I see in the difference between this and the one we had in the past is this is still flexible as a policy, but it doesn't force staff to do a specific thing but it does force look at multimodal aspects, and so that's, I think it looks really good. So that's it. Still am kind of hung up on that exceptions, mostly because it's hard for me to see detrimental environmental, social impacts that outweigh the need for accommodations. I still would love an example of where it makes sense to include a road for environmental and social reasons, a road for cars, but not pedestrians, bicyclists, and so I would love an example of that, because I'm just having trouble with that one, but.
Yeah, I don't have one. I would say in our use of the last policy over the 5 or 6 years that we've had it, it's been very rare that we've ever pointed to any of these things. In fact, it's just became ingrained in us designing projects to kind of go through these things as a matter of practice, and we have rarely discussed them in detail. So again, we don't have a lot of examples where that has occurred in Lawrence, but I think it's possible in a situation, but I just don't have any good examples.
What if you had to tear out a historic structure, put in a sidewalk, or a new sidewalk would have to be ADA?
And these are
That
exceptions
could
that are
be.
very similar to what's in the current policy. They're pretty consistent across policies.
Well, so, can you repeat that?
Well, if you're going to put in a new sidewalk, it'll have to meet ADA requirements.
Right.
Which means it'll have to be wider. So you could have something with a sidewalk there now that's 3 foot. Now you have to provide a new sidewalk, you'd have to do, what, 5, 6 foot? I forget. And a
Well, our
certain
city
grade.
standards.
5 or 6,
And a
or
certain grade.
10
and
foot for a
curb
bike
cuts,
path.
and might change the drainage. And to do that, you have to tear out a historic or affect a historic property. That would be under the social part.
150-year-old tree.
Just also keep in mind, you guys this would be a discussion that would be done at this group. It's not like, this wouldn't be talked about,
Yeah.
correct, Dave?
And I agree, but that's, I think it's important that things are somewhat subjective. But that's just it. The more subjective it is, the more it changes based on who's on staff, or who's on commission, or who's in whatever position, who's on city commission, so.
I just think these are all pretty much exceptions that have been in the policy for 6 years, and you've seen that they really haven't been used. So I don't think it's going to be the default.
Oh, I don't
to
either.
try to use
It's just-
them, so.
It's more of like, well, why is it in there if it's not pertinent, or, I don't know. Okay.
There's quite a few floodplain areas in the city. I can't, point to any kind of an example, but certainly it's an environmental issue. And if you were designing a street in a floodplain area, in a residential area, there
But-
would be environmental discussions about that.
Then should the question also be, should a street go there in the first place? Or should you only provide, I can give examples on this, should you only provide bicycle and pedestrian access in a flood-prone area? And I can give cities that have done that, put bike paths and riparian areas, but no roads, or that kind of thing. I can think of places that have done that. So I think the question is, we're still talking about cars and streets going somewhere, but saying, oh, we don't need to consider these other things, when I think it's also fair to say, hey, can we, in some of these cases, only bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure would be appropriate,
Good point,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, and a project like that wouldn't be complete streets. I mean, like Lawrence Loop and different things are going to be.
Right.
There's going to be those projects that only a bike or pedestrian way goes through. They just don't fit under the complete streets policy.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
We done with public comment? Okay. I just had, are we just talking now?
I said, anyone else?
So the word
Open
ensure,
discussion.
there's a word in here that I think is just the incorrect usage.
I've got it already.
It should be ensure.
I've got it.
Okay. That just bothers me.
I didn't notice that one.
Yeah, I just marked it up.
Oh. Oh, yeah.
All right. Is there any other discussion on this? Is there a motion for approval? Recommending approval, anyway.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion to approve. Hurt, seconded by Holstein. All right. We're on to number 4, Neighborhood Traffic Management Program.
One second here. All right, good evening. Amanda Saheen, Transportation Engineer. All right, so I want to talk about the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. It's what we're recommending to replace the current traffic calming policy. Going a little bit about the current traffic calming policy. It was adopted in 2005. There was no committed funding tied to that at that time. Funding started being available for that program in 2016, so there was about 11 years where the projects just kind of accumulated on the list. Since 2016, there's been $200,000 a year, and some of the projects have gotten knocked off, however, seem to still not be making really progress because as quick as they're coming off the list, more are being added to the list. It's really a rigid engineering approach, so it's pretty much been speed humps and some traffic circles. That's been the treatments that have came out of the program. What we're seeing is it's not really having impact throughout neighborhoods. So it may impact a really small area of one street, but then it doesn't take into account the spillover effect of what happens to the street, the next street over, when those cars just divert to go down that street. And we're seeing that with the request. We see one street come in one year, the next street come in the next year. So we think we're just really chasing the problem versus addressing the issue. And it's really only addressing speeding concerns. Now, you guys know, being here for a couple years now, there's a lot more concerns in the city about traffic safety than just speeding. So yielding to pedestrians, not stopping at stop signs, all of those things that we think that we should have a program that addresses all of those aspects. And there really is nothing in the current policy that addresses evaluation of how is this working? Are we really doing anything that's having an impact? So we think that traffic management really requires a more comprehensive solution than just engineering. So this neighborhood traffic management program, kind of some of the goals of it would be to maintain those neighborhood environments and the cohesion, promote safe and comfortable travel through all modes, minimize cut-through traffic, promote adherence to speeds, yielding to pedestrians, encourage opportunities for active transportation such as biking, walking, and wheeling. It's really a completely new approach to dealing with neighborhood traffic concerns, and it goes much further than just the engineering treatments. You've heard Jessica mention earlier the 5 E's. You've heard, if you look online, there's several, there's 6 E's, 7 E's. But there's 5 that are really at the core of all programs that talk about this, and that's education, encouragement, enforcement, engineering, and evaluation. This program was really, the existing program is really only dealing with one of those E's. And I think that's why we're not seeing the impact that we would like. So what we propose is making this more of a program, not a policy, but a holistic program, kind of more like how our pavement maintenance program is, where we look at it year to year and we determine what's our goal this year. And we propose a spending plan each year that supports the budget request. And with that, we'll do a yearly analysis of the program. We're going to look at things like speed data, crash volume and severity, community surveys, things that tell us what we did last year, how it worked, what impact it had, and be able to make adjustments each year based on that information. it's really tailored to allow us to be flexible in the application of the E's so that we can look at specific issues that we're aiming to address and allow adjustments, as we see what's effective. Kind of to give you an idea of some potential elements that we've talked about, we've, just so you know, we've had kind of a staff group working on this. So it's been me, Jessica Mortinger, Captain Adam Heffley, Brandon McGuire with the city manager's office. We've all met, talked about this. We've also had some discussions with our multimodal staff team. Got some ideas of what we think could be some effective ways that we could approach this. These are some of the ideas we have. Community-wide or targeted education. So we've looked at some examples of other cities, brought in consultants who really, this is what they do. They do these education campaigns, and we might do something one year that targets yielding to pedestrians, or maybe in a specific neighborhood we have an issue that we want to address. Also, focus strategic enforcement efforts. So we want to be able to use the police department to help us make this successful, and that would be helping fund some of the enforcement specifically for this program out of the funds that are available. Also might look at changes to current traffic controls or regulations, might be speed limits, different other controls that are there. Also want to be able to purchase equipment for data collection. We think that's one area that we really could do a lot better on, is just like the Complete Streets, is the evaluation of how things are working. Also, that data collection will help us really target that education, that enforcement to where the problem is. So we can know hours of days when there's an issue and exactly where the issue is and really target that. Also could use it to purchase or install movable engineering infrastructure. So I'm talking about there's like rubber speed humps, rubber traffic circles, different things like that, some speed feedback signs. We can move around the community and see what's working. There also may be some elements of construction of permanent infrastructure improvements like we're doing currently. And then also we foresee a program for neighborhoods to apply for evaluation of traffic management strategies throughout their neighborhood. Now some years we may look at multiple of these things, multiple things. Some years we may say we really need to focus our funds this year on this. And we'll present that to this group, we'll present that to City Commission of what we think should be the focus based on what we're hearing from the community. So there may be a year or two where we're going to really push enforcement and education. And there might be years where we really go into multiple neighborhoods and we look at those. I know I got some feedback from Commissioner Evans on kind of what that would look like for our neighborhood. So I just wanted to give you some ideas of what we've talked about is for this last bullet on here. We could have an application. So there's some other cities doing similar things to this. I've looked at Boston, New York. There's several other cities doing similar things. Application process where a neighborhood could apply. There's a team that selects which neighborhoods that year you're going to look at. And we go into the neighborhood, talk to them, see what the concerns are, collect some data, see really where the issues are, and then try to deploy that strategic enforcement, try to deploy those temporary speed humps and feedback signs, and then do that for a few months and take data and really see what the impact is. And then I think at a certain point you remove that and you give it a little bit of time, because sometimes you change people's behavior that will last. And so then we would do some data down the road a little bit and see, are we having that impact long term? Or is there something needed in this neighborhood permanently? And so I think what we don't want to do, what we want to get away from doing is just, oh, people are speeding, throw a speed hump. Let's look at other ways we can do this and really impact. We think if we can do a more holistic approach, we can really impact more across the community versus just in one specific street. What this program will not include is traffic signals, placement of signs. Those are going to be covered. Really, the placement of signs we'll talk about in the next conversation. We would like that to be more of an administrative process. Maintenance of sidewalks. We already have the sidewalk hazard program. Also for installation of sidewalks, we have the non-motorized prioritization policy. And then improvements on arterial streets. Those are really usually standalone CIP projects that would be part of the budget process where those would be considered. Now the funding for this program, you'll look at this and you'll see, well, there's no money in 2023. This is per our current budget. That doesn't mean there wouldn't be any requests in 2023. So the current CIP has this traffic calming line item. It shows $300,000 over the next 4 years. What we propose is we want, this really hinges on the flexibility to use these funds for all of these type of things. The way it's currently funded out of this capital improvement reserve fund, it's infrastructure sales tax. It's limited. You can really only buy infrastructure with it. So we can't pay for enforcement. We can't pay for those education campaigns. So we need it to be flexible. So we're requesting that that budget line item be renamed to Neighborhood Traffic Management Program, and the funds be shifted to general fund. So the way that would be accomplished would be the contractor street maintenance program currently has funding in general fund and in the infrastructure sales tax. So we would basically just displace $300,000 of that, move that to the infrastructure sales tax, freeing up the general fund, and just swap those. It would be a $0 change, but it would give us the flexibility we need for this program to really be effective. So the other thing is, currently there's 16 unfunded projects on the traffic calming project ranking list, totaling almost $500,000. Some of these projects have been unfunded for 10 plus years. In addition to those requests, I've gotten probably approximately 10 requests this year since we've had the moratorium in place. And I've let people know, hey, we're looking at a new program, by the end of the year. So staff's recommendation is the existing traffic calming list not be completed. The new program starts with the 2019 budget year. We really want to start looking at addressing the larger community concerns regarding traffic management instead of street by street. And I think the only way to do that is really to start looking at this completely differently than we have been. So, any questions?
So then what does the guy who has trouble on his street do now?
Excuse me?
So what does the individual that has, that normally come to the traffic calming, what do they do now? What's the process for them?
Well, the process for them would be, we have the traffic safety website up now.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of submissions on it. So we're actually going to be reviewing that with the police department and trying to figure out how we can strategize to work on those things. The issue is right now, when someone comes to us and they ask for that, and we approve it. We have all good intentions of approving it. It might be 5 years before they get it. So the reality is nothing is truly being addressed right now in any timely manner because there's just too much need. So we need to do something that has a larger impact. And I know it's not going to give people that satisfaction that they've got their street on a list today, but I really think it's going to have a larger impact throughout the community. So.
So are you saying if a community comes that you're basically going to be able to tell them there's nothing we can do for you right now?
I would say enter it on the traffic safety concerns webpage that we have up now, and that those are being reviewed regularly. And we're going to try to do data collection and try to also keep up with those and do some level of enforcement as staffing allows. Also, I would say if in a year we're recommending that neighborhoods can apply for programs, we're going to be selecting neighborhoods to do that. And so we would be asking the neighborhood to apply, or a subset of a neighborhood versus one person on one street. We've often went through a very long process to get something approved, and then it finally comes up for funding, and we get votes, and they can't get the votes because they don't really have the support of the neighborhood. And so there's a lot of time going into those when the neighborhood isn't even, it's one person who wants it and not the neighborhood as a whole. So we do think it needs to be more than one person creating the request going forward too. So we would outline that. So we built this program to be pretty flexible because we don't want to have to change it next year when we saw something didn't work. We want to be able to bring something each year and have that more from year to year, but still make it transparent because we're bringing it to this group and we're bringing, we would submit that to City Commission also.
Do you have an idea what your first year's program would look like?
I don't know what it would look like. I think we do want to look at something citywide the first year. I think what I've seen from all the numerous requests and obviously all of our submittals on our traffic safety website, there's concerns across the city. And we probably need to look at some education and some enforcement citywide on certain things to really try to impact things across the city. One thing I think you would see in that request every year would probably be an enforcement piece. I don't think you can do any of the rest without enforcement. It's got to be there. And
How far,
what's that?
how far does $300,000 go on enforcement?
Well, it depends how we fund it. So it depends whether we fund it with a full-time position or whether we're funding it through overtime. I think we looked generally, I believe we said 50,000 a year would get you about 20 hours a week of enforcement. We would be looking at doing that I think when we've talked to Captain Heffley, we've said, we're not going to just say go enforce traffic. We're going to say enforce traffic in these neighborhoods for this thing at these times. So we'll be strategic with it so that we make sure that we're having the most impact we can, and we'll try to back that up with the data we've collected from those counters and things, so that we make sure that we're not sending a guy out to sit for 5 hours and pull over 3 people. Let's put him out there for the 2 hours that really the issue is most prevalent. So we are going to try to be as thoughtful as possible with that. Right now, with I think where they are staffing wise, that's probably a realistic ask at this point, would be the 20 hours a week of overtime. In the future, I would love for it to be we can fund a full-time position out of it. I don't know that we're there today, but that would be discussions we would continue to have with PD and with the rest of the staff and with this group.
I was going to say $300,000 seems like a tiny little budget for a program. I think that's this much in need. Is that probably accurate? I don't know if you were able to tell anything like that from looking at other towns, or if there's any other town that's comparable that you could look at and say, this is what their budget is. And
no, I mean, I didn't really, I saw Boston had one, and they started with one neighborhood, and I think they got additional funding to do 4 or 5 at a time, and that's a huge city, right? So one neighborhood to them is nothing. And they saw they saw so many requests coming in, they got some additional funding, but I don't know what that total dollar amount was. I do think with using more movable things, so the first year ones are going to be more expensive, right? Because we've got to buy that infrastructure. But as we start getting that infrastructure in-house where we have rubber speed humps and those things, I think we'll be able to start affecting more areas as we get a program and we really see what works and we're able to start rolling that out. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a slow start. But I also think that education piece is really important. And we've got to probably look at doing something about that in the first year or two.
so another question, it says purchasing equipment for data collection, like vehicle speed and volume counters. Do we not have those things now, or?
We have some.
More?
They're limited. They're limited in numbers with how many we have at a time. They're limited to when the road is dry and there's no snow in the forecast. They're just really, it's pretty limited right now. They also take a little bit of time to set up. They're not the newest. So there's some new ones that we actually want to purchase that very easily just go right up on a pole with basically a metal bracket. And you can get some really great reports out of them. You can put them up when it's dry or when it's wet, when any issues. You don't have to put a person in the road to put them in, which is a concern. So when we currently put them out, we have to send 2 people out because they've actually got to put them down in the lane of traffic. We impact traffic. So we'd like to be able to get them to where they are easier to put up, where we can send one person up, throw them on a pole, and get the data we need. I think it's going to be much more effective and we'll be able to utilize them a lot more because we'll be able to move them easier. So we'd like to buy those.
So how did we buy those in the past? I mean, just because this is it's traffic calming funds. What funds did we use in the past to buy that?
So they bought them over time through the traffic budget, but as the city's grown and that budget hasn't grown as much, I think there's been less they've been able to purchase in the more recent years. So that's the budget that buys all of our traffic signals and all of that stuff. But we would like to buy some specifically for this program because those are used also they do yearly counts in other areas of town that are on a schedule. And so those are really what is used for that. We'd like to buy some specific for this program that we could use and move around that wouldn't impact other operations that are going on to get those counts and stuff that they're doing currently. So these would be specifically for this program.
Is it your intent to tell the 16 unfunded projects that they're basically being taken off the list and they have to start over?
Yeah, we would notify the requesters that we can contact. Some of them have been on the list a very long time, since like the start of the program. So a lot of those people have moved, we found over time. But yeah, we would go through the files and try to find email addresses or phone numbers and let those people know.
Couple of things. This is a program as opposed to a policy. What does that really mean?
It's not a set policy of, you come, you request this, if you're this, then you get this. See, what we saw happening with the other one too was, there was an issue with a bit of gamesmanship with people. So I request it, and it's 32 miles an hour, it's this 85th percentile, so it doesn't qualify. Well, I'm gonna get my speed limit lowered. Then the next year, I'm gonna come back and request traffic calming again. And now suddenly, my speed's 20, and the speed's 32, so now I qualify for the list. Which really, if you're on a residential street and somebody's going 32, it shouldn't be any different than going 32 on another residential street, just because the posted speed limit's different. So we saw that happening. And it just wasn't, that these two neighborhoods that got it this year, the speed limit was 20 in those neighborhoods. That's why they were at the top of the list. It wasn't that cars were going any faster on those streets. So I think we've just seen that having that rigid policy really was not allowing that flexibility. And so having a program, I think it just allows us to be broader and really look at what other things can we do. This says these are things we might do. We might come up with all new ideas. You guys might have some great ideas that we can do with this that we present. So I think with it being a program, it just leaves that openness that as we see best management practices and we see other cities doing things or we have some ideas, it's something that we can implement the next year.
Does the city have a lot of programs?
Well, we have the pavement maintenance program. We've got like water line replacement programs. I don't know, there's probably several in the budget.
CDBG is kind of a program, getting allocation of funds.
And then there's a committee that divvies those up. That's an example that might be similar.
Good.
But yeah, the program, this is an adaptive challenge. So over time, we might need to take different strategies to solve the issue. So the program gives us the flexibility,
Right.
like Amanda said, to focus on the different strategies, enforcement or education or a combination of them. But
Yeah, that's the challenge with policies. A lot of questions about complete streets, and it's a policy. So it's not like next week you can, change your mind about something. But another question I have, Amanda, is how do you see, and I know this is a work in progress to a degree, but how do you see this group interacting with that program?
I think we would bring a proposed list to this group to say, this is where we think we should focus next year. Here's the concerns we've had, and it would be a discussion that would be had with this group, kind of like our ped bike projects, when we bring them and say, hey, this is where we think we should spend this much on this, this much on this, and we have a discussion about it, and we come up with a recommendation. I would see it being a similar process to that staff's going to make a recommendation, but there will always be room for that input and that discussion and that community input to what we think is the most important before it went to city commission.
How often would you see coming back to this commission?
Well, this would be proposed yearly with the budget. So that's usually, we start looking at that in the spring, the budget. So prior to that, we would be coming to this group and having that discussion. It's the same thing we want to start doing with the ped bike. We'd like to start having a spending plan for that when the budget's requested. So we would be having the discussion around the same time, probably early in the year. Each year, we would be having the discussion of what do we want to focus on next year, and so that we would be prepared in the spring to.
Personally, I'd like to see progress reports more than annually, especially the first couple years of a program. I think it's important that we have that interaction and that transparency, because a lot can happen in 12 months.
Well, and I think it's gonna depend on what we're doing that year and what our timeline is on that, right? So, yeah, I think if we have information available, we won't hold it until that year, but we are committing to at least every year reporting it. But we will definitely try to involve, if we do an enforcement or a education campaign and there's survey data, the one we saw had that, some before and after survey data, we wouldn't hold that until the next year. We'd bring that to the group and show you, hey, this is what we saw out of this. So I think we were just trying to commit to a minimum standard that it would be yearly. Because currently we're really not doing that. I mean, I did some traffic count. We just did it on the ones, a couple of them that we did this year. But I don't think we've done that previously. And I honestly don't think we're seeing the impact from those speed humps that we wish we were, based on what the data I'm seeing.
It's 300,000 enough to do what you want.
We'll do what we can with $300,000. But I mean,
One consultant contractor, most of that, it seems.
well, it's more than that's in there now. I also think if we see this being a successful program, that doesn't mean that 300,000 is what you ask for every year. You could potentially ask for more. You know, it's a balance with the city budget, but if we see a big need in a year, I think that we could ask for more funding. It would just have to obviously compete with the other priorities. So.
I have a few other things, but I think I'll wait until the discussion.
No other questions? Okay, public comment on this item?
My name is Daniel Poole, 821 Ohio. I'm in favor of adopting this new program, especially if it gives you the flexibility to weight items that have previously not gotten weight, such as access to library, post office, swimming pool, those kind of things. And I'm speaking specifically about the crossing at 7th and Tennessee, which our neighborhood's been trying to get that addressed since 1985. So I think we should be somewhere on the priority list, and I think those things should be taken into account. Also possibly, I don't know if this will work, but they're doing the other end of the street on Tennessee. They're doing 6th Street, and I was thinking before the crew puts up their tools, they might just move down the block and do the bulb out there at 7th and Tennessee. So just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary Weber, 907 Merle Court. I favor this policy as well, this program, excuse me. I think it's a vast improvement over what we have now. I'm a little concerned, Vice Chair Evans brought this up in the work session, and so did a few of you, about the transition, about what happens to the people who are already on the list. They're kind of left without any options. I mean, they've identified a problem on their street, they've gotten on the list, they're creeping toward the top, and now you're going to drop them, and when they say, okay, how can we get back on the list, you have to tell them, well, there is no list. Well, what can we do? Well, you can go to this website and report a hazardous situation. But beyond that, so I'd like to see you make an attempt at any to be able to reassure those people that the work that's already been done on their requests will be used in the future in some way. Like when you go to the neighborhood that they're in, that you consider that street has been a problem in the past, and you're considering this remediation policy. I'm not certain how you're going to do it, but I'm afraid you're going to get some kickback from the people who are already on that list and are now being dropped and have no real option. Another thing I'm a little concerned about, I like the concept of the traffic safety website and being able to report a problem in your neighborhood or on your street, and I've already done it on one problem in our neighborhood, but I'm also a little worried about people gaming that too. You know, I'm a president of a neighborhood association, and if I send an email to my 150 members and say, let's all get on traffic on Rock Ledge, now you're going to have 60 emails or 60 submissions to your website, and what are you going to do with that information? Well, you're going to know it's kind of bogus, and are you going to discount it? Or, you know, I'm a little concerned about people using that website in a way that doesn't really give you the right data. So I guess that's all I'm concerned about. I think it's a really good idea to address this in a way that includes more than just engineering. And I think enforcement and education are the keys to this whole problem. And it's not a problem that our streets are badly built, it's that our drivers are ignoring the traffic laws. That's our problem. So we need to deal with that. And I think this program will go a long way toward doing that. Thank you very much.
Hello, Michael Allman again. I think, from some of the comments we've already heard in the discussion, the description of the program, it occurs to me that one of the central problems or issues is going to be equity. Like the current list right now, and the fairness of them being dropped or being at least given an option to re-up easily or whatever. Equity is going to be a tough one here. When the sidewalk maintenance program was proposed, that was one of the key concerns with that, the equity of, okay, who and how is a given area of the city chosen, on what priority, what order? And, the same with the pedestrian bicycle prioritization matrix, This priority selection process is going to be the challenge. And as far as I can see so far, this program has no delineation of how that's going to happen. I think that needs to be fleshed out in detail. Maybe it's another matrix, some very clear guidelines of how, a neighborhood and what constitutes a neighborhood or subgroups of a neighborhood. My neighborhood is one of the largest, Brook Creek neighborhood, one of the largest in the city. 1,000 households or more, compared to, what's the one there at 23rd in Massachusetts, little, 2 or 3 block neighborhood, How do you prioritize that? So that kind of equity concern, I think, is something that really needs to be addressed for this. Otherwise, I think it's a good approach to balance out all the issues, the ease, although I think we do need engineering in place before we can say, okay, now we enforce. Well, what do you enforce if you don't have the engineering there in first place? So I don't want to downplay engineering, but have the other ease as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Back to the commission for discussion.
I think this is a huge step forward. I appreciate all your work on this, or the staff work on this. When we started, it felt like our role was just to react to everything. And this feels like finally, at least a step toward this process of trying to understand traffic and how to make it safer for everyone. So, it feels like this sort of program, while it'll probably have some changes along the way, is at least moving us in that direction. The comment made earlier about the reporting frequency, I think it is important to figure out how do we learn as this is happening. And so for me, it'd be really important to see kind of what that's looking like on a lot more frequent basis than just let's wait a whole year. And maybe there's a way to consider the data not just from the traffic safety web form, but from the previous neighborhood concerns that were kind of validated, I guess, if you will. It seems like staff is going to finally have some tools and even more data collection capability, potentially, to deploy for everything that comes up. When a neighborhood complains about something, you say, well, all right, we're going to go study that. I imagine that's pretty resource intensive, and if there's some new technology to speed that up, and it's going to just help everyone to understand what's really going on. mean, this feels like it would be a huge step in the right direction, in my opinion.
I second that sentiment. I have two concerns that we can't do anything about now, but maybe eventually, and that is the budget. It feels like could use a lot bigger budget for a program like this. But the other thing I wanted to bring up is, as far as the traffic calming that has already been requested, that won't be done, I had a little instance come up in my neighborhood. My neighbor has a 2-year-old, and she came to me and said, hey, we have speeding people on our road. I haven't really noticed it that much. I think my neighborhood's usually pretty good, but what can we do? And I said, well, here's what we do now. They can, you can apply and they can install a speed bump, and here's the process you go to. And she said, I don't want a speed bump. So I think that the point is that was all that was, that was your option. And so it's not necessarily that everybody wanted a speed hump or a speed bump or whatever on their road. It's that's the option they were given. And so I think this will be, like you said, more holistic, and we'll be able to tell people, here's what we can look at and here's what we're doing to improve it throughout town. Because I think it's very valid. This is a citywide problem. It's not focused in any particular neighborhood, and different neighborhoods might have slightly different problems depending on sort of the dynamic of the neighborhood. But so it's really, I agree, hard to approach it from a street by street basis. So
Yeah, you want to address the situation. Like we spoke about this a few months ago. We chase problems sometimes, and we were talking about I think it was a parking issue on 19th Street, parking too close to intersections and line of sight, 19th or somewhere in that area. And that was the thing. Well, okay, if we do that, then it's going to move down to here, it's going to move over here, or if that's an issue on this intersection, it has to be an issue on the next one. So again, instead of picking out and creating, okay, we solved it here, but we just pushed it on down to the next, trying to kind of catch that whole area and solve a larger problem, and without maybe a speed hump or something like that.
Well, I agree with Charlie and Aaron about the content here and how this is really moving forward. I think as we've been doing this for almost 2 years now, we've, I would say struggled, but we continue to develop what our identity is and why we're here. And with the traffic calming policy, there were so many engineering-related decisions that were in front of us, stop signs. I mean, you can go through the list here, traffic signals, yield signs, sidewalks, arterial streets, that are more in your purview. And we were being asked to comment on that, and some of it was kind of uncomfortable for us to do. And I think this actually gets this group to more of a strategic look at the city and the needs of neighborhoods. And I think we can be a whole lot, I think we can really add value to those kinds of discussions. And that was one of my questions, and I think it is a work in progress in terms of how we interrelate with this whole thing. But I'm really encouraged because I think this steps us up a little bit and maybe raises our accountability to each other and to the city a little bit too. So I really think it's got a lot of positive implications here, including what we're all about.
I'm still struggling with the people that are on the existing list. I think this can be a really good PR thing, or it could be a really bad PR thing. And I think it's going to be up to you guys as a staff to make sure that you go back to those people, not just with a letter, but maybe a phone call, and because they played by the rules, whatever those rules were, and now you're saying, that game doesn't exist anymore. And I just don't think to the citizens of the city that's fair.
Yeah, I think my concern is that They told us what a problem is, and we told them what the solution was, right? Which was speed humps. And
It
I
wasn't-
don't really
Hold on, it
think
wasn't
that's-
always speed humps. It was a traffic calming policy.
I
There were
understand.
roundabouts, there were other things that were installed during the term of the policy. So it's not always speed humps.
Yeah, I think most of these on the list would likely be speed humps, I should say. And I'm even more convinced after the data that I just saw of the ones we installed, that that's not gonna get to the heart of the problem. I mean, it's funny, because since we've installed those, I've had one neighborhood call me and say they're great, and I've had two other neighborhoods call me and say, well, people aren't slowing down. Or they slow down really fast, and then they speed up. And I just don't really think it's solving the problem, and I think that, yeah, we could go spend 2 years' worth of the funds to install all of these speed humps, and I don't think we're gonna make progress across the city by doing that. And I think it's gonna make some of those people happy, and it's probably, some of those probably will not get installed because they can't meet the 70% votes. When I get it's gonna be a hard sell, I understand that, and I think but there's also been, like I said, at least 10 other neighborhoods that have called me in the meantime, and what do I tell them in the meantime? For 2 years, when we're working off a list that if they could have got on the list, they would have been the top. But we're gonna, it's hard.
Well, that's the one thing the old program had. Somebody felt like they could go do something, they come to the city, and they run through this process, and they get something done.
But
And
the-
actuality is, like you said, yeah, it's 10 years out.
Yeah, but then every year they're
We
calling
felt
us going, where am I on the list?
Right.
Oh, sorry, 6 other came in and they're now ahead of you.
Yeah, I think that really getting yourself on a list, to me, if I'm somebody who's calling in to get on a list, I'm not really getting anything done. I'm just getting on a list. So I think the difference between the policy and the program is that you have folks that are now educating other people around, like, here's the issue I see, and we could get these temporary things, we can see how it works, we can actually see in action somebody doing something, listening to our concern, having a measure in place that is saying, okay, we're going to put these temporary things in place, we're going to see how it works, we're going to take the data, and we're going to come back to you on it. That is somebody doing something. Somebody putting you on a list isn't doing anything.
Of course, now, the only thing with the program is that it may not be that particular year. It may be a citywide initiative. It will be kind of a, how do you get the public to feel involved, or they can do something with the program? That may be, you figure that out as you go.
Well, I look back at a couple of projects. Forest Avenue comes to mind, and Lincoln, in terms of the discussions we had with, the neighborhoods, Lincoln Street, street bumps, speed bumps. Becoming a resident of North Lawrence, it really helped Lincoln Street quite a bit. I was surprised, and I drive that street pretty regularly now. But what about Elm, and what about Lion, and what about North Street, and, to have looked at that holistically, like you say, I think that there might have been a way to spend money that would have benefited the entire community over there. And this is just talk, it's just words now, but those are the questions we're going to be asking ourselves. And Forest Avenue is just one little street, safe routes to school, bike route, and all of those things, but that whole neighborhood is really the context, not that one street. So I'm really enthused about this.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, one point I forgot to make was, this year we saw our speed hump prices come in at low bid about $9,200 a speed hump, and the highest bid was $13,000. Most of the bids were $11,000 to $12,000. So I think when you started, it was probably about $6,000 a piece. So prices are going up, things are getting more expensive, and we're getting less and less of these things that now have to be maintained in the future too.
So, the other thing is, it's, program overview, construction of built environment improvements includes speed humps, diverters, chicanes, median islands, pavement markings, improved neighborhood motorized crossings. So all those things can also be done I mean, I think that still goes back to it almost feels like what we need is like what we already have, the $300,000 for infrastructure changes and improvements and $300,000 additional for the program, but since we don't have that right now, it just feels like it's not gonna go that far to do both infrastructure improvements and everything else. But like I said, we can go from where we're at and figure out.
Yeah, and
budgeting.
I think we want to do those preliminary steps before we start building a list again. And there may be a list that comes out of this as we see things that are working, aren't working, in neighborhoods where we send and we do enforcement, and we do temporary, and we go, wow, we're really not seeing the impact. We need something permanent. And then we would look at that list every year and say, we want to fund these this year. There's also other ways. There's the CDBG funding. We could apply as a city for grants for that. Neighborhoods can apply. Like I said, we can ask for more money in the future if, I don't know if we get it or not, but I think some of it's going to be as we go through this, we'll see where we end. It's hard to predict. I know there's a lot of need.
I have a quick question that I was just wondering about earlier. Traffic circles, how is that defined as far as in Lawrence or nationally? I assume there's like in manuals, traffic circles is a specific.
Yeah,
Traffic circle's a traffic calming
definition.
element.
Right, because if you look online, there's several different, online specifically at what they mean. It's a little confusing, but it sounds like in the US we refer to traffic circles as very much what is in University Place neighborhood.
So
right?
the definition in city code is an uncontrolled circular intersection without channelized approaches or splitter islands.
Right.
That's our city code definition.
Okay, great.
So yes, exactly what is there. Yes. Or on Harvard,
Right. Okay. So it sounds good. I just think the budget sounds low. All right.
I'd like to just add some other thoughts on this. I think that what's happened is we've moved from just having one option to having a lot. And so maybe the way to frame it to those neighborhoods that have already had some sense that they've made progress is to revisit this question that brought it to the previous Traffic Safety Commission and say, is the problem, does it still exist? If the problem still exists, what can we now do? Which is more comprehensive than just the built environment options. So maybe that frames it as, hey, we're still, we still hear what you're saying. We're continuously reevaluating whether that's a persistent problem for your neighborhood, and we're ready to do more than what we had in the past. Now, there's a lot of neighborhoods with problems, so there's still a way to prioritize that, and that's something that we probably have to wrestle with. But we're not taking away traffic calming. We're really adding to it. And I think that's, important to communicate to the people that felt like, they won something already. It's like, well, they're now going to get a little bit more comprehensive treatment. And honestly, there are neighborhoods that probably didn't want the hump. That was the only thing they felt like they had. So now you got the option, hey, we're going to do some temporary, you mentioned the speed feedback signs. I think those could be highly effective, and I've seen those permanently installed. And if that helps the neighborhood pay attention to speed, and they can kind of police themselves because they can point to it when people are speeding by. I don't know how it works, but if those things catch fire, and we've seen now the rectangular rapid flashing beacons for some of the school crossings. And if these other approaches are more effective and cheaper, then I'd love to know, how do neighborhoods respond to that? And just getting past the speed hump, which I know that's minimizing what a traffic calming policy was, but for a lot of people, that became what it was.
Oh, I agree.
Maybe we just got to frame it as, we have a bigger toolbox now, and we're going to have better data, so we can really understand what's happening when we decide, yep, the best thing to do here is put a speed hump. Because maybe it is still, but.
It was the cheapest.
Well, I think also too, we can address the fact that what, Jessica, what'd you say, 70%, there's only 70% yield rate at crosswalks near schools. I mean, we can address things more than speed, is the other piece of it that I think is key.
And I would say that failure to yield is probably the biggest problem in this community. And it's what, when we hear it back and forth about I want to get across the street on Tennessee. It's about people don't realize that the law requires them to yield to pedestrians. How do we address that? That impacts everybody. If we could just figure out how to solve that problem. Even an improvement.
So, do we not, at this point, even have any of those temporary speed bumps in Lawrence?
No, not speed bumps. I think we have one speed trailer
Right.
that
And-
we've used, but it's old, it doesn't collect data. When we started our multimodal staff team, started talking with the police department and dug it out of the crawl space and putting it up immediately in situations. So I think there's some new technologies that can do better recording of the data. And so we haven't purchased any of that stuff since I've been around.
So police has money in this year's budget to buy another trailer, so.
Yeah, what we're looking at specifically is a trailer with a feedback sign, and we'd like to add some data collection with that. It's one thing to affect a temporary change or permanent change, depending on how it's received in that area. But if we can provide data tied to that to show what we're seeing before and after, then I think it's something of value that this group could take a look at in a kind of data-driven way.
It's a speed trailer that shows the speed. There's a little off subject, but Santa Fe Drive in Kansas City, or in Overland Park, just east of Metcalf at 69. They have speed signs, they're about this big, that are solar powered, that are permanently mounted. And, because that was a real big problem on Santa Fe there. And it's amazing how much those two signs, one going each direction, have made, because now someone can see permanently how fast they're going.
Yeah,
And it's permanent, it's not the trailer that moves.
Those, I think we looked, and I believe there's some that are like under $3,000. We can get one that is solar powered, and we can get data out of it too, but.
Yeah, there's several different options like
Sure,
that,
I'm-
like you've seen with permanent or semi-permanent installations. There's also widgets that just do that recording for us. So while we're addressing a problem over here, we can be nimble enough to go over here and start doing data collection. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head for me. This is a lot more tools in the box. And while we're addressing one or two things, we can start data collection over here to figure out, because if we're able to change gears, things like that, we can address more than one problem at a time. In fact, there's an approach in law enforcement called a data-driven approach to traffic crime safety. And what it advocates, DDAX, and what it advocates is not staying in an area for a large amount of time. It's more like I can't remember the term of it, and I'm going to mess it up if I guess. So you hit an area for a little while, and that's high traffic accident, high traffic issues, and then you move over here, and then you do that, and then you move around and keep hitting those spots for an intermittent deal with limited time, but that will drive down some of those behaviors, because what we're after is behavior modification in this. So, but to your point, there is some nice technology out there that's pretty cost effective. You talk about cost of a speed hump or something like that, and you can put out 3 devices, 4 devices, and we're actively working on that right now. So.
Great.
I just have one more, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to spit it out. I don't see anything in here related to approval of 70% of the people within 300 feet. And gee, that's great.
I think we've seen an issue with that. I mean, it's really time intensive for the requester. So we'd like it to be, if there's going to be permanent installations, we'd like that to be more of a public process through here, and we would still send the notifications when we get to that point. But we're also really planning on working more with the neighborhoods, so hopefully that's being communicated. So yeah, we want to change that a little bit.
I mean, how you get consensus on anything you do will still be a challenge. but, you know, these voting rights.
Yeah, how do you count the vote? No,
Yeah,
that's-
yeah,
Yeah, it's.
There's
and
got
I
to be
mean,
a better way to do it.
Like on 24th Street, it took them weeks because there was such a large area, and I mean, people aren't home, and it was really challenging.
Well, and I've sat in some probably we'll see some similar type meetings a few years ago when we were doing some things around some of our schools, and we would invite the neighborhoods in for a discussion, and exactly like you said, you know, we'd have a good showing, we might have 30 people, and there might be 4 different ideas that 8 or 10 different people were all pretty heavily, this is what I think should happen. They weren't really interested in the other ideas, so, yeah, it's gonna be hard to find that 70%, and they all want the same thing, they want the same end, but they think the approach is different.
Well, I think 70% promotes a division, not bringing people together. And I think this promotes bringing people together, and that's great.
Are we ready for a motion?
I would move that we approve the program, as stated.
Second.
Got it there.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moved by,
Charlie?
moved by Evans and seconded by Brian.
It was a fight for that one.
Was there, oh yeah, I'm sorry, was I wrong?
Michelle did it too.
Okay.
I'm putting you, Charlie, you're on the hook.
All right, number 5, update to city traffic code.
Okay. Amanda Saheen, Transportation Engineer. All right, we've been talking about this one for a while too. You know, when I started here, and you guys were pretty new to this too, we were seeing just a lot of stop signs and yield signs and this traffic calming, and really weren't focusing on really making an impact on changes and more strategic and higher level discussions. So this is one of those efforts to try to take something that had been elevated by a certain city code for really, I don't know what reason, over 20 years ago, and we think it can be made more administrative and still be effective. So just a little background. So Chapter 17 of the code of the City of Lawrence is the traffic code. That regulates traffic, parking meters, vehicle parking, traffic control, bicycles, skateboards, overweight vehicles, etc. The city annually adopts the standard traffic ordinances for Kansas cities, STO, and that's this book right here. I brought one. I sent you guys a link. So that's this book right here. We get a bunch of copies every year. I think it's in July. That's adopted every year. The city then amends, deletes, adds certain sections to this. This is what most cities in Kansas use as their traffic code. So there's kind of a piece that makes up this is the STO requirements, and then there's a separate city traffic codes. Those city traffic codes are the ones that require all of these ordinances for no parking, stop signs, truck routes. That is not a requirement of the STO. It's something that's a city ordinance. Really, the goal with this is simplify the traffic code. If you read through that big packet right there that I have sitting, this is our traffic code right here. So it deletes sections, then adds different language and things like that. Want to try to simplify this as much as possible. Default to the STO when we can. Also, kind of want to rely on established engineering standards to determine if signs are warranted. So there is, you know, especially for stop signs, yield signs, those type of things, there is published engineering national, you know, best practices for that. This also would provide a streamlined decision process for residents requesting signage. Currently, as you know, it's quite a long, extensive process with 2 readings of an ordinance at City Commission. And then also this, the current code requires us keep these things, schedule of stop signs, schedule of no parking. It's a paper list that's kept in the office downstairs that every time we do an ordinance, we have to go in and type on the Word document and reprint the list and put it in the book. That was set up 20 years ago, and there wasn't the technology there is today. So we want to remove that requirement. The information will still be available at the public request. It just might be something we keep in GIS or through asset management. As we develop those, we're going a lot more to GIS and asset management programs. We want to be able to keep the information in there and still have it available at request of residents through the city clerk's office. So these changes would basically make it an administrative process for the placement of stop signs, yield signs, one-way streets, loading zones, bus loading zones, taxi cab stands, parking for persons with disabilities, truck routes, no parking, all of those things. There's also some kind of other changes which really aren't really changes to them as far as process, but just updates, which there's currently some references in the code to traffic engineer. We're trying to go through a lot of our codes and just take out specific titles, and so that would just say city manager or his or her designee. There's also, in the STO, it gives some of the ones that we want to bring back in that are currently being deleted, give the chief of police the authority to place signs. We would want to change that to city manager or designee. And then also just a little bit shift in change of how it's worded for the principal arterial, minor arterial, and collector designations. It currently says those will all be done separately by ordinance. We just want to update that language to say that it will be done through an ordinance that adopts the major thoroughfares map as part of T2040. So it's really not any change in process, just an update. So currently, this STO here has requirements in here that we currently delete for no parking. It says if your street's under 30 feet wide, you can have no parking approved on one side. Under 20 foot wide, both sides can be no parking. It also has some flexibility adjacent to schools and other congested areas. So we would like to bring those sections back in to city code. Those are pretty consistent throughout most cities in Kansas. It really relates back to emergency access and being able to fit fire trucks. Fire would like 20 feet to be able to fit 2 fire trucks side by side. Stop signs, manual and uniform traffic control devices is what we use for that. It has all the warrants in there that relates to volumes and crash volumes. And so those are the sections that would be used to evaluate stop signs and yield sign requests. Just a little bit of a flow chart on kind of how we see the proposed process for this. I have a much more detailed flow chart that has the different swim lanes that I've developed for internal city staff, but this simplifies it a bit. We would still receive the request. There would be a staff member that would collect the data and evaluate it based on those standards I laid out, determine if it's warranted. If it's not warranted based on the standards laid out, we would notify the requester. If it is warranted, for a stop or yield sign, those would be installed. For no parking, understanding that that often is a pretty sensitive subject, and we have some areas in town that we have to consider the context. So we would send notification to residents impacted. We'd have a 30-day comment period where they could say, hey, you haven't thought about this. And at that point, we would review that information, make a final determination, notify the requester, install the no parking signs if appropriate. We really see that being an administrative process with engineering staff being involved in those decisions and using those engineering standards to evaluate those things. This would probably take what's now about a 4-month process, depending on city commission timing and all that, to 1 to 2 months to be able to get a sign up. And you guys have the attachment that kind of lays out all of the areas that we're looking to make the changes. We don't have, legal's been feverishly working on all of the ordinances to make that happen. Those aren't prepared yet, but they have approved that. They've looked at that list and said, yes, that's what we're making the ordinances basically reflect. So it's an overview of what changes we're making. Each of those will be different ordinances. I think they're drafting 30 or some ordinances that'll make all those things possible, and then would take those to city commission. So we are just asking for the support basically on what's outlined on that list. Any questions?
Mandy,
Why not leave the engineer explicitly in there?
What's that?
We're changing just a standard language to city manager or designee. Why not leave the city transportation engineer?
Because titles will be changing likely. as
Okay.
we've merged, and if we're changing them, we would just like to have it be, there's been a lot of that with the MSO merger, where we've been changing a lot of titles and things, and so versus having specific titles that may not exist anymore, the city manager would then be able to designate the city engineer to be the one to do that, or who's appropriate, so.
In your flow chart, if for some reason, you turn down a stop sign, does the applicant have an appeal process?
We discussed that, and really, we've discussed it with legal too, and really, we think there is, especially for stop signs and yield signs, there's very specific guidance on that.
No, I understand that
MUTCD.
from the book, but.
Yeah. So, I mean, they can always make the appeal through the city manager's office, and if, you know, we would review it, obviously. I think, too, we had a discussion about whether there should be an appeal process, and really, I think that's going to push it right back to where it was, to where everyone's coming to this group. I think what we discussed was, if we start seeing concerns, people can always show up in public comment here and at City Commission, and if there starts to be a theme and concerns, it's something we can address. I don't think we're going to see that. I think you'll see we're being thoughtful with this, and we are trying to be considerate of all of the different parameters. But, you know, I think that there's always outlets for people, so.
I'd say you'd have more appeals on the parking side than you'll
Right.
have on the stop
Well,
sign.
and I'm really hoping that permit parking part goes through, which I'm not really involved with. That's our parking person doing that around KU, which I think will help a lot of that, so.
I looked through the list, and when I got to the principal arterial, minor arterial collector streets, I paused just for a second thinking how this works in the context of a discussion like 19th Street. And, you know, is this something separate from a discussion like that?
So that discussion was had as part of the major thoroughfare,
Right.
as part of T-2040,
Right.
not this same
And
process.
I bring the question because it was a real pertinent discussion that we had here.
So it's my understanding that the way we're cleaning up and proposing the language is the process that has been taken to establish those classifications through the planning process. And then once that plan is adopted, that's from the planning side, what has been incorporated into the GIS in terms of that. So I don't know, because planning never managed all of the ordinance changes related to what was in the code in terms of ordinance changes required in that list in Public Works that was maintained, because to my understanding is that we were adopting that by ordinance when we adopt Transportation 2040 into Horizon 2020. And so it's a technicality about how the ordinances are working, like whether it be each specific ordinances versus one ordinance when we adopt that map. So it doesn't necessarily change the process in the sense that it requires an ordinance and it requires an ordinance. It just makes it not, we do it in a process that's related to holistic planning and not a one-off for just changing a street at a time. Does that make sense?
Well, I think it makes sense. I guess the question I'm trying to ask is if something happens at that level and it may affect a neighborhood or, you know, something like a lot of the issues that we've seen over the last couple of years, is somebody going to be standing up and saying, hey, you can't do that, or we protest?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens in that process. And I mean, if you look at from what happened in that situation in T2040, we downgraded a section of that street to a lower classification
Right.
based on the comments that we heard in the community conversation. So I think that dialogue happened as we were having that discussion.
Okay. Got it.
Are we asking questions, or where are we at?
Yeah.
Okay, so one question. Are you imagining this not relating to requests for changing speed limits?
We've left speed limits out of here because there's some discussion currently on what the state statute requires. And we
Okay.
want to have some of those discussions as part of the neighborhood traffic management. So we've decided to leave those alone for now. Speed limits are a pretty sensitive subject. And I think we will be addressing that with the neighborhood traffic management and future discussions with legal. There's also an odd one, I think it's angled parking per the STO requires an ordinance, so we have to leave that one. It's kind of an odd one. I think it's about the only one in the STO that requires it. So there's a few off ones like that that we're going ahead and leaving. Also, if you've noticed, we have KU in there, all the KU ones. It's all the same ones for the city that we're doing. I've spoke to Gary, I don't remember his last name, at KU. Gary?
Gary Moore.
Yeah, Gary Moore. And let him know this really isn't changing a process. We still want him to coordinate with us. We still want to know when they put stop signs up. It's just taking away that ordinance requirement the same way that it would be. And I forgot to mention that.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll move we adopt, or suggest adoption, whatever the
Recommend.
language he wants.
Recommend approval, something like that. I second it.
Yeah.
Oh, did you get it?
All in favor? Any
I
opposed?
can't hear you over there.
Okay. So, motion made by Ziegelmeyer and seconded by Dylan.
No, short.
Charts, sorry.
People that aren't using the microphone.
All right, so,
Take this off the screen here.
number 6, update to 2018 CDBG
Did
project.
we vote?
We did?
Aye. I was paying attention to who seconded.
So the tough thing is when you say that, sometimes I'm like, didn't we? It only happened 5 seconds ago. All right.
Nobody noted that Michael and Gary left, so this must be okay.
That's
Or
right.
we're doing another late meeting.
Yeah, all right. So, number 6, update 2018 CDBG project.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick update. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with issuing RFP for these projects. We were awarded more than we thought. We were awarded $303,000 of CDBG. However, we've seen prices go up recently, so I don't think that necessarily means we're going to be able to do more projects than we had assumed. We also have been noticing with the projects that we're executing this year in design, we're having to replace a lot more driveways than we had assumed. So the cost is going up of a lot of these projects. So we had previously brought it to this group in March 28th, that we were going to look at the south side of 19th Street from Barker to Moody. There's some gaps in there. There's a few spots where they exist, but some gaps in there. I think those are some really good projects along 19th Street. Also, the south side of 15th Street from Haskell to Maple. And then not real sure where we're going to end on budget with those. We've got Osdale in there from 19th to 23rd. Not sure if we'd be able to complete all of that. We would probably at least try to get a portion of that done, maybe 19th to 21st or 23rd to 21st. Might have to follow up with a following year to finish that up. Really, we need to get into design a little bit and see how those driveways look and some hydrants that are in the way and stuff and where we fall with those costs. But that will also include the design of the speed humps for North Lawrence that got approved for CDBG on Lion Street. There's 5 speed humps there that were approved. And so we'll put that as part of the same bid package to get some economies of scale. That was done through their own application process through CDBG. They've done that for multiple years. The difference this year is that we're going to do it with our CDBG projects to get some economy of scale so that we maybe can get a little lower cost on those speed humps, because if they're already here doing concrete sidewalks, hopefully they can do the concrete speed humps for a little less money. So we're going to roll that into the funding that North Lawrence Improvement Association got for those. So I just want to give that update.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, commission items, update from Commissioner Hurt on PTAC.
Just on the paper, one of the biggest transit news is switching service providers. Or at least the recommendation was made to switch service providers and that contract negotiation is still underway. If everything goes through, then that will take place by January 1st. First Transit will be responsible.
Are there, like, big changes we should expect from that? Or is it gonna just feel like nothing's changed?
If we're lucky, it'll feel like nothing's changed right off the bat. I mean, there's hope that some things will improve in the system, but those will be long-term. The hope is,
Which company did you recommend?
First Transit.
So that's the parent company of First Student that we use for the school district.
And the hope is that they would then come in and hire almost all the employees, drivers and such that are working there now.
Would there be some new equipment involved?
The equipment, most of the equipment's owned by the city or by KU, actually. They maintain it. There are some special transit vehicles that they bring, but those are miscellaneous.
The bus is free to ride tomorrow?
Go vote.
All right, update from Commissioner Schartz on the MPO bike plan.
Okay, so the MPO has begun the second phase of public engagement in the bikeway plan update. And what they're doing is several open houses at like Cotton's Farmers Market, or the Sports Pavilion, the library, and that's where the public can come in and see sort of the results of the initial survey, and they can participate in the ongoing second survey, which is also online. You guys have a link to that. So that is going on. One of the discussions they had with staff members who were in Eudora and Baldwin City are to kind of suspend for now or put a pause on the bikeway planning for those two communities so they could focus more on the projects that are going on in Lawrence and get those underway before they branch out. One of the things next spring will be to engage the school districts to create the safe routes to school bike plans, or to incorporate bicycling. And one determination is that to focus bikeway planning around getting kids to school safely is the best, so getting the infrastructure so that kids can bike to school. So to kind of focus some of the bikeway planning around that. So we're moving forward, or they're moving forward with the Lawrence Bikeway Plan, and that will be shared with this group in a work session on the 28th of this month. So on that Wednesday, that will be the topic. So that's it. I participated in the one at the library a week or two ago, and it was pretty well attended. A lot of people were interested in coming in and seeing what was going on with that. They had a nice display of the results of the survey, and then some of the different kinds of bicycle facilities that were, options. And then a lot of people participated in the survey there online. I mean, they could sit down at the computers and fill out the survey. So I think it's getting. Did I get everything?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. We'll have all the preliminary survey results from phase one to share with you at the November meeting, and we can kind of talk about what it's looking like in terms of what we've heard so far from the second meeting, and we'll have hopefully a good conversation between you and the MPO-BAC about some priorities and some direction on some of the recommendations in the plan, and a discussion about the network also, which we're also polling the community about at this point in time too. So.
Are we on to the study session? I'm curious, is City Commission going to join us for that? No?
No, it's the meeting for the bike plan update, that
Yeah.
conversation. We've had an interest, and I've had a conversation with a couple of city commissioners about what the topic was going to be, and I anticipate maybe they might attend. They
Yeah.
expressed interest. It's not a formal invitation to the city commission, so I don't anticipate seeing a quorum of city commissioners.
A few told me they were going to go to it, so
Yes.
I thought maybe it was a joint formal session. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Calendar, number 8. That's it, yeah, November 28th, 3:30?
Are we planning any of the topics for the 2019 year yet? Let's see, the planning, the calendar just kind of finishes November 28th, and then December is empty. And curious where we're headed.
Yeah.
And is there any interest in that, like an annual retreat or
That's
anything
the
like that?
plan at this point.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to start thinking about here, so we're getting close to next year. And as we're, on the staff end, as we've merged our departments with Public Works and Utilities into the new Municipal Services Department, we need to figure out appropriate staff to help assist in the team on our end to help get that going as well. But I think that's a good point that we need to think about. I think it was very productive last year, and I think it would be good to continue that next year. So we'll make note of that and start thinking about planning that out.
And I think as far as like selecting a date, it's helpful to me if I have a couple months' notice, I can actually ask for the day off. But if it's just a month or less, then I can't come if it's on the wrong day. Just, I mean, I'm sure that's true for a lot of us. Because my clinic schedule is scheduled 2 months in advance, so.
So is there, would we be able to look at dates at this point, or?
I don't think we're prepared today to do that.
Okay. Well, yeah.
But
Maybe by
I mean, in the
the,
next.
by the end of the month, maybe
Yeah,
by
by
our
the
study
work session.
session, we can talk about that.
Is that going to work for you, Catherine?
yeah, I just, you know, once my clinic schedule is out, I can't just ask for a day off because then they have to reschedule my patients. So 2 months is,
I mean, so 2 months takes us to the beginning of January, I suppose.
right.
Like, if we wait till November 28th, then we're basically excluding January. Is what I understand you're saying.
Well, if you had some tentative times that I could ask for, otherwise I just can't, unless you have it on a Thursday. But other people have other considerations as well. I'm just saying, you know, it would be nice to have, if you pick a day, make it,
Yeah, we need to discuss venue and
right.
there's a lot
I
of
mean, I know you can't do it
logistics
today, but.
but
Okay, are there other commission items or anything that needs to be covered other than that everybody needs to make sure they vote? All right.
Already did.
Yep.
Day 2.
Great.
I already lost
right.
my sticker.
Oh, darn. All right, we're adjourned then.
I put it on my nose and it took a selfie.
They don't mail stickers.